Please welcome Marie Brosig.
Hi, my name is Marie. I'm a security engineer and a product manager, and I work in a corporate security team at Otto. Now, Otto is one of the largest online fashion and lifestyle retailers in Germany, and it's on its way to becoming an e-commerce platform as well. My team and I help make sure that Otto stays secure. But we're not the ones designing, writing, and shipping software, obviously. That is our developers. So our task is to enable them to do that securely. And so last year, I rolled out GitHub Advanced Security at Otto, and I think it went really well. And I've been thinking about why that is ever since. Because change, especially at scale, is usually pretty tough, right? And there's another reason that this kind of change can be difficult. And that's the fact that the relationship between corporate security teams and developers can be really dysfunctional. I mean, think about it. The incentive structures for security teams and developers are basically opposed. Developers are supposed to iterate and innovate, usually pretty quickly, to keep delivering business value. Security teams are supposed to monitor and inform security and governance standards to keep your company secure. And those two things go together about as well as oil and water. Well, usually. Because I think that there is a better way. And I think it starts with cybersecurity advocacy, which is what I am here to talk about today. Now, a couple of disclaimers before we get started with that. Everything I'm going to show you today is a suggestion. It's based in my experience, and some of it is actually based in science, but I'm not claiming this is the only way. And I do really want you to be able to take something concrete, something that you can immediately put into action away from the session. And so if I've created a repository and I put everything in there, it's going to show up in some of the slides, and there's going to be a QR code at the end of this talk. So afterwards, if you want, please go take a look. And lastly, this topic is really important to me. So thank you so much for being here. Now, for those of you who may be less familiar with the concept of cybersecurity advocacy, let me give you a quick refresher. And that is actually going to also be kind of the introduction to our talk, because it's going to lay the foundation for us to then look how we can put that into action. All right. So very generally, right, the word advocacy implies giving support to somebody or something. For example, I could advocate on your behalf. And often when we talk about cybersecurity advocacy, we use it to mean advocating on behalf of cybersecurity. Sort of like advocating on behalf of the concept of cybersecurity, which sounds a bit strange, but usually it just means improving the level of cybersecurity, somewhere, somehow. For example, a cybersecurity advocate might teach the general public about how multi-factor authentication works, or create an awareness for the reasons behind making everyone in your company now use a VPN. But I think, and this is really important, that it should also mean advocating on behalf of the people who do cybersecurity in your organization. And in the context of corporate security teams, that can be almost anybody. From the people down the hall who work in advertising, who now have to use a password manager for the first time, to your developers who need to integrate security scanning into their CI/CD pipeline to make sure you stay secure, all of these people might need your help completing those tasks. But they might also need you to deal with management when productivity temporarily dips slightly, while they're doing these security tasks, or when they're facing their fifth supercritical security-related to-do this week, which maybe isn't actually that critical. And so that's what I talk about when I talk about cybersecurity advocacy. Advocating on behalf of the people who actually do security. Okay. But how do you actually do that? How do advocates support their developers? Because in this session, we are focusing on developers. Well, To teach somebody about how multi-factor authentication works, you need the technical know-how. But to help management understand why security is necessary, you need non-technical skills. You need to be able to communicate with and listen to people. You need to understand what they need and how much they can handle. You need soft skills. And in particular, you need to be able to do two things. Now, those aren't my original ideas, right? I pulled them from the literature, and you can find that literature in the repository. And the literature says that to be a successful cybersecurity advocate, you need to do two things. You need to be a change agent and risk communicator. Now, those concepts are going to be coming back later when we actually talk about how to put cybersecurity advocacy into practice. But let me give you a quick overview. Most of you have probably heard it said that you can never achieve cybersecurity, right? It's like a race between you, the people trying to attack you, which is why there's always something new around the corner. It might be a new threat that you have to react to, a new policy to enact, a new tool you can utilize, which is why a lot of cybersecurity is change. So if you want to support the people who do cybersecurity, you have to help them manage that change. And change agent is just a fancy way of saying that you're taking up that responsibility. But how do you know when to change, or even what to change? How do you motivate somebody to change? Now, I think there might be a lot of different answers to these questions, but one of them is risk. You can use risk to understand and argue when and what to change. And you can use risk to motivate people to change. Now, not necessarily by scaring them, but by making them understand the risks involved in not changing. So, cybersecurity advocacy is about the people who do cybersecurity and about helping them manage change. But how do we do that? How can we actually put that into practice? Well, if we want to understand how to help people through change, we first need to understand how we change. We need to understand what people go through when they change. And luckily, from decades of research, we actually have a pretty good idea about that. These 4 bullet points here are stages from something called the trans-theoretical model. It's one of the more popular models of behavioral change, and it's also known as the stages of change. Now, like all models, it's mostly wrong, but I think sometimes useful, and this is one of those times, because it can give us exactly those insights into what people go through when they transition through change. But not only that, because it describes the challenges that people face, but also the strategies that people use to meet those challenges. And that is what we can use to help other people through change. Now, my description of this model is not meant to be academic. It won't be crazily detailed. Google is your friend. And I will only be speaking about the stages relevant to introducing change into your organization, which are these 4. There's actually 6 stages, but the last 2 are about maintaining change, and that's a discussion for another day. Now, that's all pretty theoretical, so let's quickly go through this example here on the slide. And we're going to talk about what it's like to go through change. And we're going to use an example of taking up jogging. So, imagine you taking up jogging. In the first stage, in pre-contemplation, you're not even actively thinking about taking up jogging yet. But maybe, you see articles about how jogging is super healthy. Perhaps a couple of your friends, they start jogging. Then in the next stage, in contemplation, you realize that maybe you should also take up jogging. Be a little bit more sporty. In preparation, you're making a plan, trying to fit it into your schedule. Maybe you're trying to buy new running shoes, what have you. And in action, well, you actually start jogging. Now, I promised challenges and strategies. So in the following slides, for each of these 4 stages, I will show you 3 things: the challenges and the strategies, specific examples of how you can put those strategies into action, and some do's and don'ts. So this is the stage where most people don't even realize you have a problem. And so they're not thinking about changing anything, because if nothing is wrong, why would you be? And so this is why this stage is called pre-contemplation, because we're not even contemplating change. For example, suppose you have never scanned for secrets in your repositories, but nothing terrible has ever happened to you. You might think not scanning for secrets is just fine. Spoiler alert, it's definitely not. But you can see how the main task in this stage, if you want to support people in changing, is then to help them see that a problem does in fact exist. So if you're part of a corporate security team rolling out a change to your developers, you have to figure out a way to do just that, to convince your developers, and really probably your organization, that you do in fact have a problem that needs to be solved. Now, I like to do that by explaining how our current behavior can negatively impact our organization. So I might point out that if somebody pushes a GitHub access token that, worst case, has read and write access on everything in your organization to a public repository, that now potentially everybody on the internet has that same access, and that's very bad. So what you do in this stage is you show people the risks involved in how things are done, like pushing secrets into repositories, but it also helps if you provide them with evidence that those risks are actually affecting your organization. Because let's say for some reason I genuinely believe that we are wasting our time with that secret scanning nonsense. Just pointing out the risks might not convince me, because I might actually believe we run a clean ship. Nobody ever pushes a secret to a repository. And so I might be a holdout, and I might need to see some sort of proof. This is a screenshot of the repository that I've created for the session. And what I have done is I've created issues to show you how you can put those strategies from the last slide into action. It's basically a checklist of specific actionable steps that you can follow. Some of them I think of as essential, and some of them as optional, and the little labels will tell you which is which. And I've grouped them by milestones that correspond to these stages of change. And these issues here obviously correspond to the first stage, right? Pre-contemplation. In this stage, you're trying to tell people that a problem exists and convince them to do something about it. And IRL, that probably means you have to talk to at least 2 different groups of people. And that's your developers, and then that's your management. And I like to do that separately and in different ways. To me, the most significant difference is that you should talk to your developers face to face, even if that's digital. Well, you can probably get away with asynchronous communication with your management. Because, think about it, as a general rule, people don't like change. But you are about to tell your developers that there will be change. And so it's really important that you do that face to face so that you can see their immediate reaction and so that they have a chance to express that to you. This is also a really great way to unearth pain points super early in the process, to find unrelated obstacles that you should consider in your plans, and to make allies out of those developers who've been shouting about this problem you're about to tackle from the rooftops for ages. On the other hand, management will probably appreciate some form of written information that they can refer back to when this topic actually becomes relevant to them, and that they can look at when they have an opening in their calendars independent of you. Now, this last issue, assessing the impact on your organization, is optional. But let me tell you why I think you should do that if you can. When we were still in the early days of evaluating GitHub Advanced Security at Otto, we ran a proof of concept, right? So we temporarily turned it on to see how it works, but also kind of to see how badly we needed it. So for example, we were pretty sure we had leaked the art secret here or there into our repositories, right? Because we're all human and mistakes happen. But nobody really knew the size of the problem until we turned on secret scanning doing this proof of concepts. And the results were a shock to us, meaning there were way more secrets than any of us would have thought. Turns out, luckily for us, it actually wasn't that bad, because that was before secret scanning could tell you if your secrets are still valid, so many of them weren't, but some of them were. So obviously, our developers had to clean up the secrets that secret scanning found. And in hindsight, that actually served as a really great introduction for our developers as to why we might need security scanning in GitHub. And in the end, it's exactly this kind of irrefutable evidence that you're actually affected. And it doesn't really matter if you're talking to management or developers, combined with the understanding of how something can negatively affect you, secrets in your repository, that will let people follow you from the first stage of change to the second stage. Now, in the second stage, people are now aware, that there might be a problem because you just told them. And that's the good news. They are thinking about it, which is why this stage is called contemplation. The bad news is that many will still be reluctant to commit to change. Why? Well, because what if the change is worse than the problem? What if the change is worse than the status quo? What if turning on secret scanning will produce so many false positives that we'll just spend all day separating the true from the false positives? What if turning on Dependabot, and I know it's not technically part of GitHub Advanced Security, will point out known vulnerabilities in external dependencies that I can't upgrade? Now suddenly, if I'm a developer, I have to rewrite the whole module. So you can see how people here might feel that not doing something might actually be better than doing something, even if technically it will leave you in a worse position security-wise. So if you're part of a corporate security team rolling out a change to your developers, you have to figure out how to help them see that that's not the case. At this point, though, right, it's not really the change itself that people object to. It's what comes with that change. It's all those alerts, it's all that extra work, it's all those over-hours that people are afraid of. But because fear is an emotion, there isn't much you can directly do about it. What you can do, and what I always try to do, is to keep uncertainty about your change to an absolute minimum. Be as forthcoming and transparent as you can be, and then make that information super easily accessible. Because if I'm worried about something and I don't have a lot of details, I have a lot of room to imagine the absolute worst. Now, if those strategies that I just talked about sounded a little vague, maybe a little hazy, that's because they are. But that's exactly why I brought you an example of what it can look like when you do put them into action. And there's actually two of those examples here, because I believe there are two equally important ways to be as forthcoming and transparent as possible. First, every time something happens, obviously that's related to your change somehow, talk about it. And I do mean every time. When management sets a meeting to vote on your change next week on Tuesday, let people know. When you're making your way up the ladder to secure the funding, let people know. And finally, when you're negotiating deadlines for the rollout of your change and you're pushing to have them after your company's busy season, definitely let people know. Now, the second way is to provide all that information you give people in various emails and chats and face-to-face meetings in a single place to look at independently of you. Because some people, they might still be undecided. And those people might be trying to figure out how much they will actually be impacted by your change before they decide. And so they might want to look at that post you made last Thursday about the details for that thing. But older chat messages are notoriously hard to find. Forgot what channel something was posted in? Well, good luck trying to figure out which of the dozen security-related channels the team uses for announcements. Can't remember the keywords in the title of the post you're looking for? Well, have fun scrolling through every message posted in the last quarter. So put everything in one single place, because the less friction getting that information creates, the better off you will be, because people's patience trying to get it won't be endless. And guess what happens when they run out of patience, or just time for that matter? They form an opinion about your change based on the information that they currently have, because they don't have another choice. And that opinion might not be favorable to you. Now, when we finished the proof of concept, we were super impressed with GitHub Advanced Security. So we spent the next couple of months, getting everything ready, looping in management, getting the budgets, signing the contracts. And when we finally got those GitHub Advanced Security seats, we were so excited, over the moon. So we told people about it immediately in a very short email on a Thursday evening. It was literally just the announcement, because we didn't really have any details at that point, about the what or the how or the when, because it was so early on. And so for weeks, we kept getting asked the same basic questions over and over again. When is it coming? What are the tasks going to be that we have to do? What's happening, basically? And we kept getting asked those questions in meetings, on the way to coffee, during the lunch break. It felt like I didn't do anything else for a couple of days but answer those questions. And that experience is actually a big part of where the create a single point of truth issue comes from, because that's what we did to deal with that flood of questions. We very quickly wrote an FAQ and just kept pointing people at it. And I think it shows you how important it is to think about and be very intentional about when and how you communicate. Because, with every change, people will have concerns and they will have questions. Now, in the third stage, people now see that there is a problem that affects you and your organization, and therefore that you need to do something about it. And most of your developers believe you when you say you can handle that change together. And you know what? People's reactions to your change, they might still range from skeptical to lukewarm, maybe to slightly excited if you're lucky, but that's okay. Because the most important thing is that people are on board. And you have got to make sure that you keep that commitment. Because there are many things that will annoy and irritate and frustrate people when it comes to rolling out the actual change. And all of those things could potentially cost you that commitment and make rolling out that change so much harder for you. So for example, what if you turned on GitHub Advanced Security just like for everybody on a random Tuesday? It's great, right? Your whole organization is onboarded. But maybe that's really inconvenient timing for me as a developer, because I've actually got really important feature release next week. What if you turned it on and nobody knows how to use it? Like, where can you find it? Which alerts have to be fixed and when? It might be absolute chaos, or maybe just some chaos. But you can see how it might be helpful if you had the answers to those questions. Maybe also if you had, a general plan. And if you're part of a corporate security team rolling out a change to your developers, you have to make that plan. Now, I'm a type A, so I like to start at the beginning. I define my overall goals, I create tasks, and then I set deadlines. And I think tasks and deadlines are really awesome here because they clearly tell your developers what you expect of them. And if you make them the right size, they still allow for some agency. And one last thing, the more you work through your change beforehand, the more you can actually experience the change yourself, the better prepared you will be to make that plan. And let me tell you why I think so. Preparation, which is the third stage, right, is almost kind of an in-between stage. In all the other stages, you are trying to accomplish a specific goal in that stage. But in preparation, your goal is to ensure that the next stage goes smoothly. And so most of the issues that you see here on this screenshot are geared towards making sure future you is, well prepared. And in my opinion, that starts with working through the change yourself. Because if you do that, it will accomplish a couple of crucial things. It will give you a better understanding of how much work you are asking people to do. And having that understanding is really great because it will let you set realistic deadlines and tasks. It will also give you a better idea of where people might struggle and might appreciate help because it's probably where you struggled. And lastly, if you do it right, it will teach you everything you need to know about implementing your change. And that will make you way more believable when you talk about it. And it can also be the foundation for you teaching your developers if that's something you want to do. Because that's the other thing that I think is really important in this stage, if you can, is creating your own workshops to teach your developers. And I think you should choose workshops over written documentation because workshops are interactive. When people don't understand something, they can ask about it immediately. And that's going to remove so much friction. And I think you should make your own workshops instead of having your vendor do it for you. Sorry, GitHub. Because you know your developers best. You know your organization best. And you will still be here 2 months from now when people have questions again. And if they see your face in those workshops, they will know who to turn to in the future. This kind of opportunity is really invaluable for building relationships. Now, after all of that, I just wanted to say, if you work in a corporate security team and you are really outnumbered and overworked, let yourself off the hook here. Don't do any of this yourself. Literally just throw money at the problem, because GitHub does have excellent people to help you with that. When I worked on rolling out GitHub Advanced Security at Arto, I did set up and test each of these different functionalities, secret scanning, code scanning, the different supply chain security features. And this was back when secret scanning would give you basically no feedback other than producing secret scanning alerts if it found secrets in your repository, which wasn't a great thing. And that might sound like a bit of a weird complaint, but it's actually one of the top questions we got when we rolled out GitHub Advanced Security. Because back then, when you turned on secret scanning in a repository without secrets, it just looked like nothing had happened, because obviously it didn't create any alerts. And so the first time I tried it, I actually thought I had done something wrong. That's how quiet it was. Add to that you can't create a secret scanning alert by defining a variable named secret or some variation of that. And in the next stage, when you actually roll out the change, you will have a bunch of developers very unsure about whether or not secret scanning is actually doing anything. And that just unnecessarily undermines confidence in the tool. So during preparation, I did some trial and error, on how you can create a secret scanning alert without pushing a vulnerable secret into your repository, obviously. And that was mostly me trying to replicate the pattern of an AWS access key before I got smart and switched to using canary tokens. But because I caught that during preparation, I had a solution ready to go whenever somebody asked me about it in the actual rollout. And it's this kind of practical knowledge that you can't get from reading the documentation. You can only get it from working through the change yourself. All right, last stage. So far, You have raised awareness for the problem, you got people on your side, and you put in the work, you made this fantastic plan. Now it's time to actually roll out the change. Now it's finally time for action. So you hold a meeting or a workshop or maybe both. You give people their tasks and their deadlines. Maybe you answer a bunch of questions, but then you're done, right? Wrong. Because now people go off and start implementing your change. And that doesn't stop with just turning on GitHub Advanced Security, for example. Afterward, they also have to deal with the alerts GitHub Advanced Security created and the problems in their code that those are based on. Because guess what? Change isn't a one and done. It's continuous effort applied over time. So you can see how the challenge on this stage is to keep people, and probably yourself, if we're honest, motivated to apply that effort over time until you reach those goals that you set for yourself. And if you're part of a corporate security team rolling out a change to your developers, getting people motivated might already be a bit of an uphill climb depending on your developers' views on security. So what I like to do is I like to offer as much help as I can with an emphasis on the word offer. Because if you're a developer and you're perfectly fine on your own, I don't need to disrupt your day. So I try to make those tasks we set in the last stage, which, let's be honest, will probably be mandatory, as easy as possible. I think about everything I need to accomplish a task. And that could be information, perhaps a little helper script, a role you need to access something, and then I figure out a way to provide that to you. And if you are really great, you celebrate successes publicly to highlight all that hard work and to express your gratitude. Because corporations might be faceless, but you're not. There are 5 issues on this screenshot here, and that might seem like a lot, but only 2 of those are essential. And you can tell because they have the little essential label. And you can think of the rest of the issues like a menu. You can pick and choose those issues that you think you might need and also that you think you might be able to do. Now, the first thing I really think you should do is host those introductory workshops to enable your developers. And the point of these workshops is to literally kick off your change, because you use them to show everyone how to complete the required task, like literally just show them, step by step. I like to keep those workshops under an hour. So I'll do, let's say, 45 minutes, because then I can fit them into your typical workday way more easily. In those workshops, they will include some slides, a short demo, and some time for Q&A. And I'll start with the boring stuff, right, so that people can then concentrate on everything that comes after. So I will start with the requirements and the deadlines. Now, if you can, there are other formats that you can offer here, and they all have their own specific benefits. I won't talk about all of them right now because they are in the repository. I do want to say that I really like these expert-level workshops for curious people, because they are meant for people who like to take things apart, for people who like to customize and tinker with their tools. And I just think that a lot of developers are like that. The other thing that I think you absolutely should do is to celebrate achievements publicly. You are asking a lot from your developers when you're asking them to change. And that's okay, because you probably have a good reason, but it's still a lot. So every time you reach a milestone or a goal, that's an opportunity for you to say thank you. That's an opportunity for you to highlight that hard work, maybe get it seen by management. It's an opportunity to come together and celebrate, maybe have some cake. It's an opportunity to build and strengthen those essential relationships that you have with your developers. And so this is why I actually hosted those expert-level workshops for curious people doing our rollout at Arto, because I just knew there were a couple of things our developers would want to customize because I know our developers. And one of those things is how you consume alerts, because by default, you have to access them in the browser. Like, you literally have to open the browser. But many of our development teams have their own tooling around things that they need to check regularly, right? Because they don't want to check different tools by hand. Why would you want to do that? And there's a couple of ways. You can get those alerts automatically. So for example, GitHub provides webhooks for repositories that trigger when there is a security scanning alert. And then you can just plug them into somewhere. And we were trying to plug them into our messaging app, which is Microsoft Teams. Now, the problem is that the message patterns that GitHub and Teams use don't match, or at least they didn't used to match. And so Teams didn't accept messages sent by GitHub webhooks, which was really frustrating. In the end, we did figure out a solution. It does involve routing your messages through another tool first, but hey, it gets you alerts from A to B. But we would have never talked about this topic in the introductory workshops because it's not technically necessary. But being able to customize a tool can do a lot for your developers' acceptance of that tool. And I really care about that because if a tool is mandatory, actually, especially if it's mandatory, I want people to not hate using it. Cybersecurity keeps changing, right? And if you want to keep up, you have to change with it. Even big corporations will have to change. But corporations are made up of people. And if you want to change corporations, you have to change people. Which is why working in corporate cybersecurity includes a lot of asking other people to change. And that change is absolutely necessary, don't get me wrong, because attackers get more sophisticated, and so corporations have to get better at defending themselves to stay secure. But humans don't really enjoy change, and a lot of the time, they're having a hard time with it, especially if you keep asking them to change repeatedly. So if you work in a corporate security team and you take cybersecurity advocacy to heart, which I hope you do, that's a challenge you'll have to face over and over again. Not necessary for every small change, but for everything that's disruptive to a majority of your developers. Because when corporate security teams don't want to or don't know how to help people through change that they ask them to do, that creates worse outcomes. And that can lead to a strained relationship between those teams and their developers, or developers and just generally the concept of cybersecurity. But it doesn't have to be this way. This screenshot shows you the issues from the 4 stages of change that I've talked to you about in the last 30 minutes. And you don't even need all of them to make your change easy on your developers and your organization. You only need about half. I really like this slogan. People keep asking me what the slogan is about, so let me tell you. There is this concept, and it comes originally from education. It says, meet people where they are. It means, in essence, that to be able to reach someone, to teach them something, you have to start with where they are today, right now. For example, what do they currently know? How do they feel about something? What else is going on around them? And that also applies if you're asking people to change. And it's your responsibility to try and meet them there. Because when people are involved, you have to take into account more than just the straight facts. Humans aren't robots. But when we talk about change in corporations and we say things like buy-in and commitment, too often we don't talk about the fact that as humans, we have feelings. And generally speaking, those feelings factor into how we approach other things. And those feelings might be difficult and messy and really inconvenient, but the reality is that they still exist. Which is why it is not enough to hand down cybersecurity policies as proclamations, where you will probably won't create real commitment just by standing on a team's responsibilities. Why setting deadlines and assigning tickets alone will never create lasting change. So if you want to reach across the table, if you want to build better relationships, if you want to change hearts and minds, you have to address them both. And so if you want to create sustainable change in your organization, if you want to keep up with the evolving threats, if you want to stay ahead, I suggest you start treating your developers as friends. Don't make them do things you wouldn't dream of making your friends do. Don't talk to them in ways you wouldn't talk to your friends, right? You get it. Instead, listen to them, talk to them, advocate for them, treat them like they are your friends, and help them through their change. Because I think you can. And if you need or you want a little help, you can find it in the repository. And if you have thoughts or questions, come see me IRL or in the discussion. Thank you so much for being here.